So, are you coming to the graduation in your country rag, or have you already realized that this holiday is not for you? The class teacher's voice was cold and habitually demeaning. She said it as casually as if she were asking about the weather. But to me it sounded like a point-blank shot. It was the week before graduation. The girls around me were talking excitedly about their dresses, flipping through photos, silk fabrics, shiny rhinestones, shoes that shone like window displays. And I sat there, trying to be invisible. Everything inside clenched into a lump of shame and resentment. I already knew that this evening would pass without me. But when Malgorzata said it out loud, right in front of everyone, it hurt so much that something inside broke. There are some things that leave scars on the soul forever. This evening was one of them. I grew up in an ordinary family with only enough money for the bare necessities. My dad fixed old cars in the garage, my mom worked at the bakery from morning till night. I understood that my parents were doing their best to give me the best, but we could never afford what was the norm for others. School for me was more than just a place to study, it was a battlefield. From the first grade on, it was clear who was cool and who was SOSO. Branded backpacks, phones, trips abroad, all these were symbols of belonging. But what hurt the most was realizing that even those who should be supporting and teaching you were also looking down on you. Our class teacher, Mr. Malgorzata, knew how to put you in your place with a single glance. In her eyes she always mocked the ordinary families. When graduation was a month away, she called a parents' meeting and started talking about how luxurious the event should be. Prom is a memory for a lifetime, she pronounced, and the parents enthusiastically nodded. The hall, the show program, the host, the live music, everything had to be top-notch. No one objected until the conversation turned to cost. Understand, the holiday should be worthy. If someone can't afford it, it's better to say so right away. I think it's not worth spoiling the overall level. Her words sounded like a judgment. I realized that my family wouldn't be able to afford even half of what was required. But my mom, seeing my devastated face after the meeting, said firmly, "We can do it." She searched for the right fabric, pored over pattern magazines, and believed she could make a dress that would be the most beautiful at the party. "You'll be a real princess," she repeated every night while sitting at the sewing machine. We chose a delicate fabric, no frills, but it looked exquisite. Every stitch on the dress was stitched with love. For my mom and me it was not just a dress, it was a symbol of faith in ourselves and in a better future. And so 2 days before graduation, we brought it home finally ready. That night I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to believe that I could withstand all those looks. But my hopes were dashed in a puff of smoke when I got to the general meeting before the holiday. "Is this what you're going to come in?" Her voice, like a whiplash, pierced through me again. The hall filled with quiet laughter, someone turned away so as not to betray the sneer in her eyes. And I stood in the middle of all this theater, trying to maintain my dignity. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like time had stopped forever. The assembly was over, and as if under hypnosis, I walked out of the school corridor and headed home. Everything swam before my eyes, the walls of the school, someone's familiar faces, the cars in the parking lot. The classroom teacher's words, that snide tone, the laughter of her classmates. It was all repeating in my head like a broken record. When I crossed the threshold of the house, my mother immediately realized that something had happened. She stood at the stove with a spoon in her hands and, looking at me, froze. "Christina, what's wrong with you?" I couldn't squeeze out a word. Tears choked my throat. I threw the bag off my shoulders and sat down in a chair, clutching my hands so tight my fingers turned white. They said I couldn't go there, I whispered finally and felt the first tears roll down my cheeks. Mom set aside her spoon, wiped her hands on a towel, and sat down next to me. Says who? What happened? The classmate. She said I didn't fit in. And that I better not even show up in a dress like that. Mom's eyes flashed with pain. She silently took my hand and seemed to be looking for words of encouragement. But they never came. To say that everything would be okay? She knew it wasn't true. That night I couldn't sleep. The dress my mom had sewn with her own hands was hanging on a rack in the corner of the room. I looked at it, and my chest clenched again with pain. It no longer looked beautiful to me. It had become a symbol that I was different. The next day at school, everyone was talking about prom again. The girls were discussing hairstyles and jewelry, the guys pretended to be indifferent, but they were mentally trying on costumes, too. It was like I didn't exist anymore. No one even tried to support me or ask me what I was going to do. I sat on the last desk and tried not to look at my classmates. But inside I was seething with anger and resentment. Why should I feel worse than them? Just because of money? This thought did not give me peace. In the evening, I saw my mom sitting quietly in the kitchen again, staring at one point. She looked like her strength had left her completely. Should I tell her I wasn't going anywhere? But that would mean ruining her endeavors for good, crushing her dreams of her daughter being beautiful and happy at this party. I'm going anyway, I said suddenly, not believing my own words. Mom looked up at me. Are you sure? Yes. If I don't come, it will be my surrender. And I don't want to lose to these people. Mom smiled sadly, but warmly. You're the strong one. You can do anything. And so the day came. I spent a long time in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress. My hair was neatly styled, my makeup was light, almost imperceptible. My mom hugged me tightly, and I felt her hands trembling slightly. When I got to the restaurant building, my heart was pounding so hard that it sounded like it could be heard outside. My entire class was already gathered at the entrance. The girls looked like princesses from the covers of fashion magazines. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. A hum of voices, laughter, music. For a few seconds I thought no one even paid attention to me. But as soon as I took a few steps, a wave of whispers swept through the room. That's her. My God, what did she come in? Somebody's chuckles, glances sliding over me like knife blades. And then I heard her voice. Here's our heroine. The classmate stood at the stage with a glass in her hand and looked at me with a look of triumph. The whole room seemed to freeze, waiting to see what would happen next. I stopped, feeling my legs shaking. But I didn't have time to say a word. I think you'd better leave. This night isn't for everyone, she added with a smirk. All I could see before I walked out were the satisfied faces of those who had been waiting for this moment, and the sad looks of those who just watched in silence. I stepped outside, gulped in a full breath of air, and felt tears roll down my cheeks. That was the last time I let someone break me. The next day, I made a decision. A decision that would change my entire life. I woke up the next day with an emptiness inside. Her voice still echoed in my head, this night is not for everyone. It wasn't just a blow to my ego. It felt like I'd been erased. Like I wasn't even entitled to any memories of high school. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I felt a strange calm. You know, there are times when there's a complete calm after a flurry of emotions, and in that calm, a new strength is born. I got out of bed, looked at my reflection in the mirror and said, "Never again." I knew I couldn't stay here. If I wanted to prove to myself that I was worth something, I had to leave. Move away. To build a life away from those who were used to looking down on me. My mom was a strong woman, but even she understood that our town was too small for big dreams. When I told her I wanted to go to university in another city, she only nodded and said, "You can do anything. The main thing is don't forget who you are." We prepared documents together, packed our things. And then came the day of farewell. I saw my mom standing on the platform with moist eyes, but keeping a smile. I hugged her tightly and boarded the train. It was my first step into a new life. The city greeted me with noise, movement, and freedom. No one here knew my past. No one knew what small-town Christina was like. Here I could be anything I wanted to be. University opened the door to a world I never dreamed of. The first few months were difficult: lectures, nightly exam preparation, working as a waitress in a cafe in the evenings. I was falling down from fatigue, but every morning I woke up feeling that I was moving forward. And most importantly, no one here looked at me with contempt. I made new friends, and for the first time in a long time I felt appreciated for my personality, not my looks or status. Years passed. I graduated with honors, got an internship at a large company, and built my career step by step. Every time I received a promotion or a letter of praise from my superiors, I remembered that night at the restaurant door and felt that I was getting closer to something important. But one thing kept reminding me of the past: reunions. Every year, photos of classmates from the next reunion would pop up on social media. The smiles, the champagne glasses, the dressy dresses, they kept up this game of who has the most bling. I could see their faces, but I didn't feel the pain anymore. More like a slight sadness and irony. It all seemed so empty. I didn't visit their pages or write comments. My life had become very different, and I was proud of myself. But one day, everything changed. I was sitting at my desk looking through my email when I noticed an email with the headline, "Invitation to Reunion, 10 years later." I opened the email and saw a short message. "Christina, we are going to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our graduation. It will be a special night for all of us. We hope to see you." At the bottom was the location and date, the same restaurant as 10 years ago. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen. My first reaction was to ignore the message. Why go back to a past that had hurt me so many times? But something inside me perked up. A question I'd been asking myself since that evening: why did I have to leave then? Why did I let them take the holiday away from me? That thought sat deep and waited for the moment to remind itself. I slowly closed my laptop and whispered, "No. This time will be different." I decided that I would go. But if I go back there, it won't be as a girl who got kicked out because of a dress. I would go back as a woman who proved to myself and to the world that her worth was not measured by her clothes or the approval of the crowd. I made an appointment with a stylist, chose a dress that was elegant but not flashy. It was to be more than just a dressy dress, it was to symbolize my new path. Simplicity, taste and confidence. The evening of the meeting was approaching, and although 10 years had passed, I felt the same trepidation as I had then. But now it wasn't fear, it was excitement. As I approached the restaurant and saw the familiar faces, a sense of déjà vu came over me. Everything was so much like that day. Everything, except for me. I took a step forward and opened the doors. Inside was the same buzz of voices, laughter, and music. For a moment I felt again like the same girl who had just walked in and heard the taunts. But that feeling quickly disappeared. I straightened my back and walked confidently toward the center of the hall. Silence came as soon as people began to notice me. Some recognized me at once, others looked at me with bewilderment, trying to remember my face. And then I heard a voice I would never confuse. Christina? I turned around and saw her. Pan Malgorzata was standing next to the set and holding a glass of champagne. She was still looking down as she had before. You decided to come after all. I smiled. Yes. I came on my own this time. And to stay. I stood in front of the restaurant doors and felt my heart pounding so loudly that its pounding seemed to be audible all the way down the street. This restaurant had once seemed to me an unattainable luxury, a place where only the chosen few got in. I remembered standing here 10 years ago, afraid to even cross the threshold. But today was different. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The first thing I smelled was the odor. The light scent of fresh flowers, mixed with a hint of expensive perfume and the faint bitterness of coffee. I'd once associated that scent with a holiday. Now it reminded me of something else, an inner calm and confidence. The tall columns were still in place, and the huge chandelier under the ceiling glimmered with crystal lights. But something had changed. The restaurant no longer seemed so perfect. The gold frames on the walls had darkened, the upholstery of the sofas was worn in places, and the music that played from the speakers sounded not festive, but rather just for background. I took a few steps forward and looked around the room. Sitting at long tables were people who had once been my whole world, but were now just memories. Their faces seemed familiar and alien at the same time. Some had changed beyond recognition. Here was Lena, the queen of the class, who always looked like she had just stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. Now she was sitting in the corner with a glass of champagne. Her makeup was still flawless, but her eyes betrayed fatigue and her smile seemed forced. It was amazing how 10 years could change a person. At the other table sat Mark, the guy half the girls at school were chasing. He'd put on a little weight, but he was still trying to act like his life was a success. But his tense posture and strained smile said otherwise. I continued walking forward, hearing whispers behind me. "Is that her?" whispered one of the girls. "Really? Seriously, is that Christina?" I pretended not to hear. But everything was turning upside down inside. And then Izzy came up to me. She used to be the gray mouse who always followed Lena around and was afraid to open her mouth without her permission. But now everything had changed. Izzy looked stylish and confident, her eyes shining with kindness. "Christina! I can't believe it's you!" she exclaimed happily and hugged me tightly. I was confused for a second, but then smiled back. "Hi, Isa. It's been a while. You've changed so much." She took a step back, examining me from head to toe. "But you've always been beautiful, and now you're also so confident. You just glow." Her words sounded sincere, and it melted my wariness a little. "Thank you, Isa. You've changed too. For the better." We exchanged a few more phrases, and I noticed that her attention was diverted by another girl who called her over to the table. I looked around again and noticed a few of the girls who had once paid no attention to me were now looking in my direction with interest. Their eyes slid over my outfit, my hair, my shoes. They were whispering about something, covering their lips with their hands, but I knew for sure that their discussion no longer contained contempt, but rather a mixture of surprise and envy. Suddenly, something else caught my attention. Or someone else. At the end of the hall, near the stage, stood she, Mr. Malgorzata. Her posture was still straight, her gaze was still trying to radiate confidence, but her face was different. It was tired, the wrinkles were deeper than I'd expected, and her eyes no longer had that arrogant glint in them that could pierce any 10th grader and make him feel insignificant. Our gazes met, and I noticed her flinch, but quickly pulled herself together and took a few steps toward me. "Christina. You came after all," her voice sounded steady, but I caught something odd in it. I smiled, calmly, without a shadow of irritation or anger. "Yes, I came. Of my own free will this time." She was silent for a moment and nodded slightly. She seemed to be struggling to find the right words. And it was at that moment that I realized the meeting had just begun. Mrs. Malgorzata stood right in front of me. Her posture was still straight, but now it was just an outward manifestation of habit, not confidence. After a few seconds of silence, she nodded to a vacant table. "Shall we sit down?" I nodded demurely and made my way to the table. We sat down across from each other. Her gaze slid over me from top to bottom, assessing every detail, my dress, my posture, my confident movements. "You've changed a lot," she said, pouring herself some champagne. I smiled. "And you haven't." Her face tensed for a moment, as if from a bad joke, but she remained silent. The tension between us could have been cut with a knife. There was laughter all around, toasts and the hum of voices, but it all seemed secondary. "I remember you standing at the door then," she said suddenly, looking into her glass rather than at me. "And how it all came out." I took a deep breath and felt my fingers trembling slightly. Her words brought me back for a few seconds to the very night I'd left the restaurant feeling like a nobody. But I was different now. "Then you told me this evening wasn't for everyone," I said clearly, holding her gaze. She looked up at me and tried to smile, but her smile came out crooked and unsure. "You know, sometimes we make mistakes," she said quietly and took a sip of champagne. "I must have been. Was too harsh." I leaned a little closer. "Abrupt?" "You called me redundant." "It wasn't abruptness, it was humiliation." My words hung in the air like a loud bang. She lowered her gaze, took a long look at the bubbles in her glass, and finally exhaled. "You don't understand. At the time, I thought I was doing everything right. That success was only an outward gloss. I saw you and thought, why you're trying to be where I don't think you belong. You felt entitled to decide for me?" I interrupted her. "Your words then destroyed my evening. And you know what? I left, but with every step I promised myself that one day I would come back and be above it." She froze, as if she hadn't expected those words. "You're right," she said after a pause. I was broken. My life wasn't perfect, and I was snapping. On the students. On those who were weaker. A faint spark of real pain appeared in her eyes. "But is that an excuse?" I asked coldly. Pani Malgorzata slumped her shoulders and shook her head. "No. It is no excuse. I lived hiding behind my power. And I lost everything. I could see how difficult these confessions were for her. This was no longer the woman I remembered. In front of me sat a person with a broken life. But I could still feel the weight of the past on my shoulders. Should I forgive her? Let it go? Or let her feel the pain I felt? The silence between us became deafening. I closed my eyes for a moment and heard my own thoughts. Forgiveness isn't for her, it's for me. I exhaled and said, I forgive you. She looked up as if she couldn't believe her ears. But I won't forget. Those words sounded like the summation of everything I had endured over the years. Małgorzata closed her eyes and a tear rolled down her cheek. I stood up from the table and looked at the hall. The classmates who had been watching our conversation from afar were now looking away or pretending to be busy talking. But I knew they heard every word. I walked past the tables toward the exit, feeling that this time I was coming out not a loser, but a winner. I walked towards the exit, feeling dozens of stares. Some of them stared at me openly, others tried to pretend that they were engrossed in their glass or conversation with their tablemates. But I knew they heard everything. Every step I took echoed somewhere inside me. I stopped at the threshold and turned around. My gaze slid around the room. My former classmates, people who had once seemed more than just school friends, now looked small, lost, and alien. And suddenly it hit me, I couldn't leave like that without saying what I'd been carrying around for so long. I slowly walked back a couple steps and raised my hand, calling attention to myself. The noise in the hall gradually died down. Can I have a moment? The voices quieted completely. Everyone turned to me, and I, feeling a slight shudder, gathered my thoughts after all and spoke. I've been wondering for a long time why I'm here. Why go back to a place where I was humiliated and made to feel like a nobody? But you know what I realized? I paused and looked around at those present. I didn't come here to prove anything to you. I came here for me. To finally stop being afraid. To remind myself that I'm no longer the girl who could be broken with one word. I saw the faces of my classmates gradually change. Some looked away, some continued to stare with surprise, and some nodded as if agreeing with me. Life is a strange thing. We judge people by their clothes, by their cars, by their status. But the real value of a person is not the price of their dress or suit. Real value is how he handles adversity. It's how much he respects himself and others. My voice sounded calm, but every word hit exactly on target. School taught me a lot of things. But the main lesson I learned was not from textbooks or teachers. I realized that all this external stuff is just a wrapper. The real power is within us. I took a breath and added, I don't hold a grudge against you. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I left here humiliated. But I'm stronger because of it. And, strangely enough, for that I am even grateful to you. The silence in the room was deafening. Someone dropped a fork on the floor, but no one even turned to see what had fallen. I looked at Pani Małgorzata again. She was sitting quietly, wiping her eyes with a napkin. Forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a choice. And I choose it for me. At those words, I turned around and slowly walked toward the exit. The door closed softly behind me, and I stopped outside. The fresh air burned my lungs, but in that moment I felt incredibly light. As I passed the restaurant, I heard the music playing inside again, and the murmur of voices gradually returned. But it didn't matter anymore. My own words resounded in my head, and for the first time in years, I felt true freedom. I took a deep breath and walked forward with a smile, knowing that there was more than just memories of the past ahead of me. I came out victorious not over them, I overcame my fear and my pain. That's how I closed the door on the past and opened a new chapter of my life. What would you do if you were me? Would you forgive? Or walk away, leaving the resentment to live inside you? Write in the comments, I'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. It's special to me and I hope it resonated with you as well. Life throws us challenges sometimes, but each one makes us stronger. Write in the comments, have you had something like this happen to you? Have you felt like someone unfairly belittled you or underestimated you? And how did you deal with it? I'd love to read your stories, they may inspire others as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps to develop and create even more interesting stories for you. And, of course, apologize for possible errors in the voiceover. The artificial intelligence is trying, but sometimes can make mistakes. If something sounded strange, write in the comments, we will definitely take it into account in the future. Thank you for being with me until the very end. See you again.